Hello, my name is John Burke. I'm a visiting lecturer at Reseba University in Riga, and this semester, autumn 2022, I delivered a course, International Banking and Financial Markets. Many of the students expressed interest in forward contracts and exchange rates, so I want to make this short presentation to elaborate on comments I made during the course. I want to discuss forward contracts within a particular context and make it very simple to understand. Export-import transactions. The presentation focuses on the point of view of the exporter. Why? Because the exporter receives revenue in a foreign currency. Most exporters will want to convert that foreign currency into a local currency in order to make mandatory payments to labor, suppliers, tax authorities, and so on. What is the solution? The solution is book a forward contract for a specific amount of the currency. Now, what specific amount of the currency? Well, generally it's the spot rate at the time the contract of sale is entered into, and the price is set in the foreign currency. So for my example, I've taken an Australian exporter going to sell wheat in the amount of 350,000 US dollars to a Japanese importer. That Japanese importer will make payment when the wheat is received 3 months out. Let's assume the wheat is transported on a container vessel. We also know that it's not uncommon for international trade contracts to be priced in dollars and not in local currencies, those of the exporter-importer, because the dollar not only is a global reserve currency, but the predominant invoice or trade currency. So let's take our example even further by weaving in more assumptions. So at the time of the contract of sale, 350,000 US dollars can purchase on the spot market 500,000 Australian dollars. So this sets the expectations of the exporter. The exporter would like to receive 500,000 Australian dollars when the payment is made in US dollars 3 months out. So what does it do? It can book a forward contract at a rate of 0.7, and that simply means about 1.42 Australian dollars for 1 US dollar. So if the exporter purchases a forward contract, in other words, hedges the transaction, we can see in the table that this would guarantee that the Australian exporter receives 500,000 Australian dollars when payment is made in US dollars to the exporter. If, on the other hand, we take another scenario and the exporter decides not to hedge and leaves itself exposed to currency risk, if the Australian dollar appreciates against the US dollar, it's going to cause a loss in the sense that at the time of payment, 3 months out, the 350,000 US dollars purchases less Australian dollars. Why? The Australian dollar got stronger. It appreciated. So in this assumption, and I've made up these figures, I've said that the Australian dollar appreciated from 0.7 to 0.71868. This would give our exporter 487,000 Australian dollars. It's a loss, at least in terms of expectation, of 13,000 Australian dollars. This I'm not going to explain. I just want to focus on 2 points. All right, so at the time of the contract, a US dollar can buy 1.42 Australian dollars. And I've rounded up the figures for you. So the exporter wants to hedge. I just want to emphasize that the exporter is not a speculator. So some participants on the market are speculators. and they're needed to make the market very liquid. But if we imagine our Australian exporter dealing in numerous international trade transactions that are denominated in a foreign currency, it wants to use the forward contract as a means to manage its cash streams, as a means to know for certain the amount of Australian dollars it will receive when it's paid in a foreign currency. It's not a speculator. Definition of the forward contract. So a forward contract is a derivative. What do we know about derivatives? A derivative is, in this case, it is a financial instrument that derives its value from an underlying asset. What's the underlying asset here? It's the currency pair. It's the price of an Australian dollar in terms of a US dollar. It's said that the exporter takes the long position. It's the buyer. Who is it going to buy from? It's going to buy from its bank. So the bank is the seller and takes the short position. Just this last bullet point. Forward contracts are traded in the over-the-counter market. What significance does this have for the exporter? It means that the exporter can take on counterparty risk. What do I mean by that? The bank might fail to perform its obligation. It could become insolvent. It could fail to perform for another reason. This is a risk that would not exist if our exporter purchased an exchange-traded option. Why? Because in the event of default, the exchange steps in to fulfill the promise, to fulfill the obligation of the defaulting party. The legal dispute between the defaulting party and the exchange, that's not the exporter's problem. The other thing I want to mention about forward contracts is that one often hears the explanation that forward contracts are customizable, unlike exchange-traded options. Well, in a sense, that's true and untrue. I mean, forward contracts are standard contracts. What do I mean by that? I mean, the bank is going to pre-establish all the terms of the contracts except for what I will call the primary terms. Terms such as price, delivery date, the main terms of the contract, those with which the parties will focus the most. But a forward contract on an OTC market is a standard contract just as it would be on an exchange-traded option, except that in the OTC we have many different institutional buyers and sellers, and they may use different standardized contracts. That does not exist on an exchange, where the financial instruments are completely fungible. Yeah, this is, we apply the definitions to our problems, but I said enough about this. Everything is self-explanatory. The only thing we want to focus on again is that there is a time lapse between the contract of sale, where the price is set in US dollars, and when delivery of the wheat will be made, and in return, the importer will pay the amount specified in the contract, which in our hypothetical is $350,000 US dollars. And that's what may cause the problem. How many Australian dollars can that purchase at the time of delivery? So we have two possible outcomes. And this, I often hear that this is referred to the exporter can obtain a gain or can get a win or get a loss. Yes, it's possible, but let's look at it. So let's assume that the spot exchange rate on August 1, that is going to be the delivery of the wheat and payment of the US dollars. It rises to 0.71868. Well, what does it mean? It means that our contract has become more valuable. Why? Because at that spot rate, a person who holds 350,000 US dollars can purchase 487,000 Australian dollars. Our exporter has a contract entitling it to payment of 500,000 Australian dollars. It's a valuable asset. It's a contract for payment of Australian dollars that far exceeds what's available on the spot market. We can call this a gain to the exporter. But what's the exporter want? The exporter just wants the bank to perform and pay the 500,000 Australian dollars. Let's take the opposite scenario. The Australian dollar is depreciated. It falls to 0.6809. What happens there? Well, now our contract will not be so valuable. Why? Because the $350,000 at the spot rate when payment is to be made can purchase 514,000 Australian dollars, not the obligatory payment under the forward contract of 500,000 Australian dollars. So it's that contract is worth less than what could be purchased on the spot market for an identical amount of US dollars. So this is the payoff formula. It is the spot price at contract maturity. And what do we mean? Forward contract, not the contract of sale. So we have two independent contracts in this transaction. And K is the delivery price. Okay, the amount of Australian dollars that the bank is going to transfer to our buyer. And of course we have the payoff position for the short position, where it's K, which is the delivery price, minus the spot price at contract maturity. Again, we're talking about the forward contract, not the contract of sale for wheat. Now we come to the more interesting part, and I'm not going to discuss it in this presentation. I have a couple of slides on it, but what do we want to really know? All right, we can see the forward contract. All right, we buy it on the OTC market. We're going to book it through a bank. It's going to be probably the exporter's bank, and we can see how they work and why they're used. Why are they used? You can't predict the future. What is the exporter seeking? It's seeking certainty. It's seeking a certain amount of local currency when it knows it's going to be paid in a foreign currency in a forward period, not for immediate delivery. But what's the more interesting question? The more interesting question is, what causes these movements in exchange rate differences? Why, for example, as we've seen in the hypotheticals, why would the Australian dollar appreciate? Why would the Australian dollar depreciate against the US dollar? This is the more fascinating question. The forward contract is a simple mechanism. Again, as I said, if you're not a speculator, it's to manage your cash streams. So the reasons for exchange rate fluctuations, it's the relative interest rates of the countries of the issuing currencies. And this is what I'm going to talk about in the next presentation. I'm not going to do it now because I did not treat it with sufficient depth, and I want to treat it independently from this overview of forward contracts. I'm going to end there. If you have any questions, you know my email, and I'll be glad to answer them. And I will try to post the presentation on the reasons for exchange rate movements in another video. So I'll talk to you then.